And what could be more 21st century than having a good old moan about China, as it is revealed today that a chap called Chris Cash, who is a parliamentary aide who allegedly worked for Alicia Kearns, the head of the Commons Defence Committee, has been arrested on espionage charges. Now, he professes his innocence. My understanding is Mr. Cash, who's 28 years old, went to Hangzhou to university after doing a degree in the UK, did his master's there and is a Chinese language specialist. But he says that his role advising people like Alicia Kearns has been to actually reveal to people quite how dangerous Beijing could be, quite the threat that they could pose to this country. And yet he and another man who's yet to be named, who was arrested in Edinburgh, have been accused of espionage for the Chinese government. Well, here to talk about this is Dr Alan Mendoza, who's the head of the Henry Jackson Society, a foreign affairs think tank, and a bit of an expert on all things China. Alan, great to have you on.
Hello, Alex.
Hi. I mean, I've known you a long time, Alan, and I know that this will not surprise you at all, this bit of information that someone potentially, allegedly, has managed to get a job in the Palace of Westminster and has links to Beijing. But how worried should we be by this?
Well, I think you're right. It is a worrying issue, not because it hasn't happened before in varying ways, but actually the fact that there is a British citizen and not, say, a Chinese person who's come over to try and spy, that does suggest a level of sophistication that we haven't seen thus far from China when it comes to human intelligence sources. And so I think this will certainly alarm the authorities, it will alarm everyone in Parliament, it will alarm, frankly, everyone in the UK that there may be people willing to, if it's proven correct, of course, willing to betray their country for another country. And of course, the questions therefore are, and we'll no doubt discover those when the case is unveiled, what the motivation might have been for this, Alex, because of course there are several motivations that could have been the reason for why someone might choose to spy against their country.
I mean, what is China's motivation? Because I don't think at any time soon China's planning some sort of military assault on the United Kingdom. It seems to me that where we're locked in some sort of pseudo-warfare with them, it is entirely economic and especially, I think, about getting intelligence in order for China to advance their economy, where perhaps they don't have information or developed sectors like we do.
Well, yes, I think this is very much an intelligence gathering operation. It's unlikely that in the position that the alleged spy was in, that he would have access to any particularly secret information as such. However, he would be he would have been aware of the activities of the most hawkish members, if you like, of the Houses of Parliament, looking to sort of tighten the screws against China, given its activities. And no doubt he'd have fed back a lot of intel to China about just political happenings in general. And, intelligence is very important. It's not simply about, say, military maneuverings. It's about understanding climate culture, what's happening within British politics, how that may relate to China going forward. So there is definitely a value in that. Because the Chinese could have used any such information to look at their diplomatic and sort of trade posture and reacted accordingly. So it would have been important to them, yes.
I mean, what should the UK government be doing now? Because a number of backbenchers have said to Rishi Sunak, we need to cut diplomatic ties, no more visits to the country. But it strikes me, actually, that there's a lot going on that we're not doing anything about. The sheer volume of shipping containers coming from China, selling stuff far, far cheaper than we can make it or manufacture it or even import from other countries. Then, of course, we put ourselves in shackles and self-flagellate over climate change. And China also gets to undercut us. They're the ones making the vast majority of solar panels these days and electric batteries for vehicles as we sort of move towards our net zero transition. So what should our approach be? Because it strikes me that we're not exactly in a great position to survive without importing cheap stuff from China or even extricate China from the network of our infrastructure.
Well, you're absolutely right. You've got the essential problem that the Chinese have embedded themselves into the global economy, into our economy in a way that makes it very difficult to extract. And you can't, cut off diplomatic ties. And we know we didn't cut off diplomatic ties with the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War. We're not going to do it with the Chinese, even if there is a new war happening now. But what you absolutely have to do is let China know exactly what it is. And that is, of course, it is a threat to the UK. It is not some challenge. It is not some partner. It is not some sort of competitor. It is a threat. And it has proven it's a threat by virtue of activities like this and other things, espionage it's undertaken to try and undermine us. And the way to respond to a threat is, again, not to not deal with it at all, but to deal with it in a very specific way, which is to cut it out of anything that could relate to your critical national infrastructure, anything that relates to national security, anything that relates to health, anything that if situations did turn to the worst. You mentioned earlier there wouldn't be a war between China and the UK. No, but there is a threat, obviously, to Taiwan from China, which we take very seriously. There could be an altercation, us and others involved in that. So what you wouldn't want if that were to happen were the Chinese to cut off all your supply lines of the most important things you need for your economy. So this is long overdue. People have spotted this for some time, ourselves included, saying we're too dependent on China in critical areas. We've got to pull back on that. And that needs to start now. And China needs to be told emphatically, we know what your game is and we're not going to play it any longer.
But this game is well beyond the shores of the UK, isn't it? Even if we were to, say, manage to extricate China, as we have done with certain things, such as the 5G network, the development of that. If we are to say to Beijing, sorry, we're not having any Chinese state-backed companies involved in this, the problem is it's become this huge geopolitical model now, hasn't it? How worried are you at the building relationship between China, Russia, Iran, and their spread, essentially grabbing resources and taking over control of swathes of Africa and parts of the developing world?
Well, of course it's concerning, Alex, because this is, if you like, the unfree world challenging the free world. If you look at the countries you just listed, they all have one thing in common. They are countries which seek to undermine the international order. They seek to overturn it for their advantage. And as a result, what we need to be doing, quite emphatically, is bringing our own coalition of free nations to work together on the China front to basically say we're standing together, much as we did during the Cold War, against those who wish the free world ill, who have a different plan for the free world to what we do. And only through collective action, with us working with allies, are we going to see this through. We didn't fight the Second World War on our own. We didn't fight the Cold War on our own. And we're not going to be able to fight China's threat on our own. It's going to have to be a collective effort. And again, that needs to start now. I
mean, that word threat has been called by Kemi Badenoch. We've got to be very careful with the language you use, saying that China is a threat could, in fact, escalate things. And we've seen this before, haven't we? Whenever there's a bit of a grizzle that gains publicity about China, they're very quick to jump on it and say, well, we consider this aggressive rhetoric from you. Do we need to pussyfoot around Beijing? Do we need to sort of think, well, if we wind them up too much, they already have the power to make life very difficult for us with how infiltrated they are with our infrastructure? Or should we actually be upping the ante a bit and saying, look, we know what you're up to and we're not going to stand for it anymore?
Well, in a sense, you've kind of put the dilemma right on the table there, because if you're confronting a bully, and you've just suggested China's response, as it has been proven with countries like Australia and Lithuania, is to try and bully those who call it out, then, frankly, the only way you deal with a bully is not by, laying down, accepting what they want, but actually there's never a better time to stand up than now, because tomorrow will be harder than today to do it. So realistically, yes, there is a danger the Chinese might react strongly to it. But that's why I say this has to be a collective approach. It's much harder for China to act collectively against all the countries of the West, say, if they all call China out, than it is against one country. And again, you saw the Lithuanian and Australia examples over the last few years when, one country tried to do something and was then picked on, essentially, by China. So the lesson is clear. You've got to stand together, because if you don't stand together, you'll all hang separately in the face of this, kind of growing power that is China. And if we can do that collectively, I have every confidence that we will be able to change the course, not simply of China and what it plans to do internally, but equally the fortunes of the free world. And this is as good an issue as any to stand on and to fight for our sort of rights and for our responsibilities and for things that have made us the nations that we are.
I mean, British ministers constantly point out that China's our fourth largest trading partner, and we've got to have cosy relationships with them because we need them to join us in tackling climate change. But it strikes me that net zero, it actually feeds into this system brilliantly, doesn't it? Because while we make manufacturing in this country incredibly difficult and expensive to achieve, China is getting the uptick, like I said earlier, of making all of the sort of green agenda products for us, and at the same time are chugging out a load of carbon in the atmosphere from coal-fired power stations because they don't care.
Well, exactly. And this is the essential problem. The idea that the UK, for example, is going to solve the global situation, even, you know, whatever you think of the science of net zero on its own, is for the birds. It's clear that countries like China are, you know, having their cake and eating it on this, and that you will not get a result or reaction on this that will get anywhere on that issue, let alone all others, by giving them a free pass on it. In reality, once again, we're going to have to, you know, kind of get tough with China. Doesn't mean we don't trade with them. We can trade with them on non-essential, non-key infrastructure levels, areas, as long as, of course, it's not done by human labor being exploited, such as in Xinjiang province. Another problem, of course, with the Uyghurs that the Chinese have. But what you want to have is a respectful relationship where the Chinese are fully aware that we will not tolerate the kinds of behavior we've seen internationally and domestically from them over the past few years. And if we can do that collectively with our allies, once again, we will achieve progress. If we don't do that, though, I'm afraid the Chinese will only embed themselves further. And the next time we have to come to do it, to actually stand up to them, we will have a much worse time getting to that position. So it really, the onus, Alex, is on us now. It's on us and on our allies to take action and look at this before things get worse.
I couldn't agree more. Dr Alan Mendoza, always there, with a fantastic voice of common sense and an acute and keen look at the state of geopolitics. You know,